I mentioned earlier that SharePoint represents a group of products and technologies and is not a single application, like a Microsoft Word or a PowerPoint, for example. So when one person says that they use SharePoint, well, they could be talking about something totally different than the next person who states they use SharePoint. So in this lesson, we'll look at the various pieces of the SharePoint puzzle and then further break down a couple of those pieces that are important to this training. All of this should give you a better understanding of the numerous possibilities for using SharePoint. So let's begin with the big picture and look at the various SharePoint products out there. We'll begin with Windows SharePoint Services, or WSS. WSS is part of Windows Server, which is needed, of course, to run SharePoint services. WSS provides the tools needed for collaboration across organizational and even geographical boundaries. WSS also provides a foundation platform for building web-based business applications quickly and easily. Next is Microsoft Office SharePoint Server, or what we call MOS. MOS requires SharePoint services and includes an integrated suite of server capabilities that provide comprehensive content management and enterprise search functionality. We'll dive deeply into MOS in a moment, but think of MOS as an extension of the capabilities you get with WSS, the SharePoint services. Next is SharePoint Designer, and if you think of SharePoint Services and SharePoint Server as providing the technology and the platform, then SharePoint Designer provides the tools to customize SharePoint websites without having to write or deploy code on the server. In this title, we'll be focused on SharePoint Services, WSS, and SharePoint Server, MOS. Let's explore each of these components a little further now, shall we? We'll begin with WSS, the Windows SharePoint Services, and we'll talk about data storage and content management. Now, WSS provides something called lists and libraries as the structures for storing data. Think of lists as storing tabular data like you'd see in a spreadsheet, and think of libraries as storing actual files. WSS has a powerful set of services for managing the data stored in lists and libraries that can allow you to do things like associate metadata with both list items and files, create versions of list items and files, check out and check in files for editing, index sites, lists, and libraries for improved searching capabilities, and manage content approval. We'll get into lists and libraries in detail later, but WSS includes a variety of specialized lists and libraries that can be used for different kinds of tasks. Next is Web Platform and Site Model. All of SharePoint Services features are delivered via a hierarchy of websites that can be generated quickly and easily using SharePoint's site provisioning model. Now, SharePoint is .NET Web Application, which makes it an excellent platform for delivering web applications, not just websites. We'll explore this in detail later in this title when we tackle websites and web parts. Next, we'll talk about security. Using groups and roles for granting access to secure content, SharePoint allows you to control what options users see or don't see on their user interface. Pretty much everything in SharePoint is secureable, and SharePoint supports authentication schemes like Active Directory, as well as custom schemes to accomplish this. Next is management, and what I mean by management is the ability to keep sensitive content away from technical administrators. SharePoint's multi-tiered admin model makes this possible, meaning administrators can't actually see what users save in SharePoint sites, even though they have access to auditing tools, monitoring tools, and backup and restore tools as well. Then we've got services. There are several SharePoint services that support the other core services in SharePoint, like notification services, alerts, and inbound email services. RSS feeds would be a good example of a notification service supported by SharePoint. SharePoint even includes migration tools designed to help with deploying SharePoint to the organization. Let's talk about API. Do you write code? Well, if so, you'll be glad to know that SharePoint has a strong object model and web services. You do your work from the SharePoint user interface, and everything you do from there uses SharePoint APIs. That's Application Programming Interfaces. So what this means is you can write code to access all of the SharePoint features, which then makes it possible to totally customize how SharePoint behaves by default. So that covers WSS. So how about MOS? MOS, or Microsoft Office SharePoint Server, can be simply described as a product that has been built on the WSS application platform we just discussed. Now, because we consider MOS to be a WSS application, MOS uses WSS resources, but also extends WSS by providing a completely new set of features or services. And they are, starting with, core services. The MOS core services are shared across an entire SharePoint deployment, and they are the foundational features that enable MOS 2007 applications. So personalization, search functionality, business data catalogs, and Excel services are considered core services. Then we've got application services like dashboards, workflows, and user profiles. They're the building blocks for creating applications in MOS. By mixing and matching these services, you can provide a plethora of MOS applications. Portals are a very important user interface feature of SharePoint. We use portals to provide access to other SharePoint services. So in MOS 2007, you can create portals for collaboration and publishing content. Using built-in templates, you can create specialized portals like My Site and personalization sites. We'll get into sites in great detail in this title. Enterprise Content Management. Well, that builds on WSS document management with additional features not found in WSS. It also consists of records management and web content management to help you publish content to a site that's intended to be viewed by many people. Users and personalization. This is the service that allows you to manage user profiles, target content to a specific audience, and even personalize portal content for individuals and groups of individuals. Enterprise Search is what allows you to index all content within SharePoint as well as outside SharePoint. Then we've got business process integration, allowing for integrating data from outside sources with SharePoint. And then, of course, we've got business intelligence, and that's the service that provides support for cool things like dashboards, reports, and Excel services, which, by the way, creates server-side versions of spreadsheets that are rendered in web pages for viewing. So, one organization's SharePoint deployment will look different than the next. Your company, for example, might use a combination of features from one or more of these SharePoint applications to meet your business needs, which of course can be very different from the needs of another company. Maybe your SharePoint deployment uses 60% business intelligence with 40% document management, while the company next door uses their deployment mainly for document management using very little business intelligence. That's the beauty of SharePoint. SharePoint is whatever you need it to be, and you don't need to be a developer to make it happen.